Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we plunge into complex subjects by dissecting fascinating source material, aiming to unearth the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight for you. Today we're embarking on an extraordinary journey, really, into a collection of sources that boldly challenge conventional historical narratives. We're diving deep into claims about ancient bloodlines, mythical creatures, and secret societies said to stretch back to the very origins of humanity itself. Our mission today is to explore the truly, audacious assertions presented in these materials. We're going to scrutinize their claims regarding the true origins of royal bloodlines, delve into the hidden meanings they attach to familiar myths like dragons and fairies, and uncover how these ancient concepts allegedly connect to powerful modern-day organizations. We'll be examining some truly revolutionary interpretations of biblical figures in ancient history, and as we do, we want to make it absolutely clear. These are the viewpoints presented within the source material that we're exploring. These are not our endorsements or positions. Okay, let's unpack this. These sources paint a picture far wilder than any fantasy novel, suggesting that the heroes and mythologies we've always enjoyed aren't just innocent tales, but rather covert bridges to a fundamentally misunderstood past and perhaps a signal of a terrible tribulation coming.
What's particularly striking about these sources is how immediately they position figures like dragons and fairies. They're presented not as mere folklore, but as a Rosetta Stone, right? The missing pieces that, according to these texts, connect everything to the Genesis 6 conspiracy, and even, quite controversially, to the bloodlines of the Antichrist.
Wow. Okay. Genesis 6 conspiracy. Can you just briefly unpack that for listeners who might not be familiar?
Sure. Yeah, it refers to a specific, often debated interpretation of Genesis chapter 6. In this view, the sons of God mentioned aren't, pious human descendants of Seth, but literal fallen angels who interbred with human women.
Right.
And this union, they contend, gave rise to giant offspring known as the Nephilim. It's this foundational event that these sources claim kickstarts the entire lineage, the hidden history, and the cosmic conflict we're about to explore.
Got it. So that's the cornerstone.
Exactly. So the core question these sources compel us to ask is, what profound hidden relationships are we being asked to absorb here? And what far-reaching implications do they suggest for our understanding of both history and the future?
So let's dive headfirst into this provocative idea.
Yeah.
The notion that dragons and fairies aren't simply confined to the realm of children's stories or whimsical fantasy. Our sources suggest they are, in fact, something far more profound. Deliberate, Grail Rex Deus, bloodline legomanism. Now, that's a mouthful, isn't it? And it immediately throws us into some very specific terminology. But what it essentially means in their framework is that these figures represent a hidden language, a coded message designed to conceal and transmit a deeper truth about specific bloodlines and power structures.
Precisely. The core claim here is that these seemingly innocent folkloric figures are actually complex mnemonic devices. They are allegories meticulously designed to preserve and transmit a very specific secret history and a lineage that stretches back to ancient times.
A hidden language.
Yeah, this hidden language, or legomanism as the sources term it, is said to connect directly to the Grail legends we're all somewhat familiar with. However, the sources don't see these Grail legends as random medieval romances or, chivalric tales.
Right, not just stories.
No. Instead, they assert that these narratives were spawned by Rex Deus houses. This term, Rex Deus houses, refers to what the sources describe as conspiratorial families with ancient, powerful lineage, families that allegedly controlled significant historical events from behind the scenes.
Okay.
And here's where the twist comes in. The Holy Grail itself, within this deeply revisionist context, wasn't a physical cup, a chalice, or an object of miraculous power. Oh no. These sources insist that the Grail was, in truth, the Sangreal, meaning the holy bloodlines that house the secrets to the Kings of God dynasty.
Sangreal, holy blood, not a cup.
Exactly. This concept of Sangreal as a sacred bloodline, rather than a tangible artifact, is a critical pivot in these narratives, fundamentally reinterpreting one of the most famous myths in Western culture. What truly unifies all these elements, according to the Gnostic and Masonic writers referenced in our material, is the assertion that Grail, fairy, and dragon legends are all considered one and the same.
One and the same. So interchangeable.
That's what they claim. They are not separate stories, but different facets of this singular, overarching hidden secret. They are presented as interchangeable allegories, each a different facade for the same core secret. the existence and perpetuation of these specific bloodlines, making them, in essence, different symbols pointing to the same hidden royal lineage.
And if they're truly one and the same, then the House of Dragon takes on an entirely new and far more significant meaning than just a fantasy trope from, popular series. Our sources describe it as the genuine House of Grail Kings, and even more astonishingly, the original Rex Deus from Genesis.
Wow, from Genesis.
Right. This doesn't just place them in ancient history, it positions them as an ancient powerhouse, existing from the very beginning of humanity, as presented in the book of Genesis.
Indeed. The House of Dragon is depicted as the primary antagonist in what the sources call a generational war, a conflict waged by a group identified as the Sons of Jared.
Which connects back to that Genesis 6 conspiracy.
Exactly. Where the Sons of Jared believe the specific dragon bloodline descends directly from Watcher's fallen angels and Nephilim. To grasp the scale of this claim, understand that these Nephilim, this race of giants, born from the alleged union of fallen angels and human women, are said to have spawned the notorious, evil pharaoh kings and dictators who have dominated humankind throughout history.
So they're drawing a direct line from ancient Egypt to modern dictatorships.
That's the assertion. It's a truly sweeping historical reinterpretation, drawing a direct, unbroken line. And the most startling assertion, building on this Nephilim lineage, is the claim that the posterity of Nephilim will bring about the tribulation of the end times and the Antichrist.
Whoa. Okay, that's huge.
It is. Furthermore, these sources adamantly insist that dragon sovereignty is maintained in the Grail kingdoms, which hold the great and mysterious repository of ancient knowledge. So these figures are not just power-hungry, they are also portrayed as the secretive keepers of profound ancient secrets, information that allegedly confers their supposed right to rule.
Keepers of ancient knowledge.
Right. The key insight here is that these sources propose a direct physical lineage from mythical ancient giants, the Nephilim, isn't just a historical oddity, but a direct thread leading to the prophesied Antichrist and the tribulations of the end times, completely reframing religious prophecy through a genetic lens, essentially.
That's a staggering assertion.
Yeah.
The very bloodline of Nephilim will bring about the Antichrist. Building on that, let's shift gears a bit to a seemingly lighter yet equally profound aspect of these sources. The surprising claims about fairy blood and their origins. Our sources delve into Celtic mythology, claiming that exclusive royal families throughout history actually carried what was known as fairy blood. In Wales, for instance, these families were specifically called Tylwyth Teg, which literally translates to the fair family.
Interesting. The fair family.
Yeah, and the Romans, interestingly, apparently viewed the Celts as tall and fair-skinned, perhaps subtly contributing to this mystique of a special, distinct lineage.
The etymology of the word fairy itself becomes quite telling within this elaborate framework. The word, these sources explain, derives from fee or fae, both meaning fate.
Fate, okay.
Yeah, this in turn stems from the Latin fata, which described spirit beings that guide fate. You can see this echoed in terms like Neo-Latin fays and fees of France, all believed to be interconnected under this hidden meaning.
So fairies are linked to destiny.
According to Gnostic lore, yes. This fairy blood wasn't just a mystical designation or, a poetic metaphor for nobility. It was originally understood to have held the fate or destiny of the Grail bloodline. This isn't just about appearance or beauty. It's about a preordained inherent role in shaping history and destiny.
Right. More than just folklore.
Exactly. And these extraordinary figures, fairy, grail, and dragon princesses, were known in Gnostic literature as elf maidens and the guardians of the earth. The very word elf is said to derive from Elb or Yilby, which fascinatingly came from Albi in Languedoc.
Languedoc, isn't that where the Cathars were?
Precisely. This region of Languedoc is specifically described as a Gnostic hotbed, allegedly a crucible where various Gnostic and mystical sects flourished. These included the Cathars, the Essenes, the enigmatic Merovingians, the Knights Templar, Kabbalistic Jews, and even groups linked to ancient Trojans and Scythians.
Wow, quite a convergence.
Yeah, the sources are meticulously crafting a rich, interconnected tapestry of secret lineages and mystical groups, all converging in this one historically significant region.
And speaking of Cathars and this alleged Gnostic hotbed in Languedoc, our sources assert that the Cathars were fully conversant with Ring and Grail culture. They apparently branded it the Messianic Bloodline, referring to it quite provocatively as the Elven race of Shining Ones, which of course connects directly back to the concept of fairies and their mysterious lineage.
Elven race of Shining Ones.
Yeah. What's particularly striking is their alleged support for the Albigens, which is described as the Elven bloodline traced through a powerful matriarchal lineage. This includes figures as significant and controversial as Mary Magdalene, Miriam and Shemeth, and even Lilith.
Lilith again, Adam's first wife in some traditions.
Exactly. A figure steeped in ancient folklore.
The inclusion of Lilith here is, as you say, quite provocative, especially given her traditional portrayal in various mythologies, and it's a thread we'll definitely pull on even further later. But what's historically critical here is the context of the Albigensian Crusade. The sources controversially frame the brutal genocide against the Cathars by Catholicism not as a mere religious suppression, but as a deliberate crusade waged against the rival, even fairy bloodline of the Antichrist and against the rival form of mystical Christianity.
So a crusade against the bloodline, not just a belief system.
That's the implication. This suggests a calculated, systematic suppression of an alternative Gnostic form of Christianity directly tied to this Elven lineage. After these devastating purges, Gnosticism was indeed forced underground, only to re-emerge around the 10th century through a group called the Bogomils, who then exported their religion to France.
Right.
By the 11th century, Catharism was rapidly gaining ground, threatening to become the majority religion across France, Germany, and England. The sources even describe the Cathars as viewing themselves as an ancient counter-conspiracy, dating all the way back to the first millennium, locked in a silent war against Catholicism, a struggle they claim was documented in various suppressed historical books.
A counter-conspiracy.
Yeah, this narrative is further complicated by the claim that Manichaeans, a dualistic religious movement connected to the Cathars, allegedly infiltrated Rome, Catholicism, and even ancient builder guilds, or collegia, becoming known as Johannite brothers. This paints a picture of a deep, covert, and generational struggle for religious, ideological, and societal control, with these ancient bloodlines at its very heart.
So if we're following this intricate tapestry, we have Cathars, fairies, and Manichaeans all tied together in this grand hidden war, almost like a secret history playing out beneath the surface of what we think we know.
Very much, yeah.
And at the root of it all, according to these sources, are these shining ones. The sources emphasize that this shining metaphor isn't some benign, ethereal concept. They insist it's rooted in fallen angels, false gods, and numinous Nephilim allegory. It's quite a dark origin story they propose.
Exactly. The concept of shining ones is not unique to one culture. It permeates across numerous ancient civilizations. Gods like Deus in the ancient Indian Veda, Deus in Latin, Devos in Slavonic, Dia in Irish, and Zeus in Greek all remarkably share the core meaning of bright one.
Bright one. Okay.
This semantic consistency across disparate cultures is, for these sources, no coincidence. Similarly, the term El, which appears prominently in biblical names like El Shaddai, Elohim, and El Elyon, was also used in ancient Canaan to identify lofty ones or shining ones in Sumeria.
So El meant shining one.
In this context, yes. The Sumerian shining ones were also referred to as Elohim or an Anananag, a fascinating term meaning fiery sons of heaven who are explicitly stated to have came to earth and procreated Nephilim.
There it is again, the direct link to Genesis 6.
Absolutely. It's a direct, undeniable linkage within the source's narrative from these ancient deities to the very beings central to the Genesis 6 conspiracy. Furthermore, the very word elf itself is rooted in the Hebrew, Canaanite, and Sumerian El, again carrying the meaning shining one.
Elf comes from El.
It's deemed equivalent to the Anglo-Saxon engel and Old French angela, which eventually became our modern word angel, implying these beings were originally understood as beings of light, or bright ones.
Okay, that connection makes a kind of linguistic sense, I guess.
But the sources are meticulously keen to differentiate. They distinguish the generic El, which they claim refers to Canaanite tyrants who allegedly copulated with humans, from the biblical El Shaddai or Elohim, the God the Most High.
Ah, so there's a distinction made.
A crucial one for their argument. The former, the generic El, are explicitly labeled as imposters and pretenders in this revisionist framework, suggesting a deliberate co-opting of divine terminology for nefarious purposes. It's a very specific and intricate attempt to twist biblical terminology to fit their own unique narrative.
Now let's take this intricate web and trace this dragon kingship through history, moving from the very ancient to more familiar yet still shrouded legends. Our sources claim that the origins of elven fairies, those enigmatic figures, are rooted in Viking and Germanic traditions. And from these traditions, they assert, sprung powerful Rex Deus families, such as Bruce, Sinclair, William the Conqueror, Nut, and Rollo. These are names deeply embedded in European royal history.
Right, major figures.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting, connecting these ancient claims to something many of us grew up with. King Arthur, a figure often relegated to pure myth and legend, is said to have partnered equally with the Viking Deus Gawain in a Grail, St. Grail, alliance against the Romans.
Arthur and Gawain as Deus allies.
That's the claim. It suggests a far more complex, almost geopolitical historical backdrop to what we typically think of as a purely mythical tale. The Norse dynasties, according to these sources, possessed magical power and were explicitly known as Elven queens and kings, or elves and afs. It's complete reimagining of familiar historical figures.
What's truly fascinating here is the way these sources meticulously weave familiar figures and myth into an entirely new tapestry of hidden history. Arthur's famous Round Table, for instance, isn't just presented as a meeting place for chivalrous knights.
No. What is it then?
It's explicitly portrayed as a recreation of the fairy ring of kingship, a mystical brotherhood of great heroes. This, in turn, is boldly said to mirror the Anunnaki ringlords at Nippur and Atlantis.
Atlantis, wow.
Directly linking the Arthurian legend to antediluvian pre-flood civilizations and suggesting a connection to powerful non-human entities. The influence of ancient Scythian and Sarmatian lore is heavily emphasized in this narrative.
Scythians and Sarmatians.
No.
What's the connection there?
These traditions, the sources allege, contained elements like magic swords, which they directly link to Excalibur, and golden chalices, which they connect to the Grail, used for the consumption of blood.
Chalices for blood, okay.
Yeah. The Sarmatians, described as a cousin race to the Scythians and notable Roman mercenaries, famously displayed the draconious banner, a dragon standard. This very banner, the sources claim, was later adopted by the Welsh king Vortigern as the Red Dragon, the iconic symbol we still see on the Welsh flag today.
The Welsh dragon.
Arthur's own battle standard, they note, featured a dragon, curiously depicted in a 1290 CE manuscript with the Sarmatian dragon. This visual connection for these sources points to a deeper, pre-Christian origin for these legends.
So Arthurian legend is just a cover story.
Essentially. They see Grail and Arthurian tales as merely Christian gloss for the true cult, which they assert is Celtic through and through, and directly derived from authentic legends from Scythia and Sarmatia. This framework reinterprets beloved narratives as mere surface-level interpretations of a hidden, far older truth, revealing what they claim is the genuine underlying history.
It's truly a radical reimagining, not just of mythical tales, but of foundational historical moments. And this sprawling, intricate web of ancient lineages, they claim, continues right through a pivotal moment in English history, the Norman Conquest.
Right, 1066.
Our sources state that Norse families like the Bruce and Sinclair clans strategically intermarried into these Rex Deus bloodlines, as did the descendants of Gawain. This implies a deliberate long-term consolidation of power through dynastic alliances.
Strategic marriages.
And the Norman Conquest itself, in 1066, is given an extraordinary new spin. William the Conqueror, according to these sources, didn't just conquer England, he merely reclaimed his family's kingship, which allegedly originated with Knut's Viking Empire.
Reclaimed it, so he already had a right.
That's the suggestion. A preordained right to rule, a hidden claim to the throne based on this very specific ancient lineage.
The claims about the St. Clair families are particularly illustrative of how these sources build their case. Their new name, St. Clair, translates quite fascinatingly as Holy Shining Light, directly connecting them back to the Shining Ones we discussed earlier, the fallen angels and Nephilim.
The Shining Ones connection again?
Exactly. The sources assert that the Gnosticus of southern France, the Rollo-Elven bloodline of the Norse, and the Grail Kingships of Wales and Britain were all part of the very same web of bloodlines and religions.
A unified network across Europe.
Pretty much. This emphasizes a unified, covert network of power stretching across vast swaths of Europe, operating under a shared, secret understanding of history and lineage. Furthermore, the Norse and the mystic Essenes, a Jewish sect known for their esoteric beliefs, are said to have held strikingly similar religious tenets.
Norse and Essenes. That's an unexpected pairing.
It is. The Norse, for example, believed their royal families descended from the god Thor, a connection explicitly labeled by these sources as a Nephilim link. This implies a widespread, albeit hidden, understanding of these non-human origins among royal and mystical groups across different cultures and traditions. It's a grand tapestry of interconnected belief systems and bloodlines.
And this lineage, this pervasive dragon kingship, isn't just confined to the ancient past or medieval history. Our sources claim that the Dragon Court, a truly enigmatic organization, was formally re-established in Europe as recently as 1408.
1408, that's a relatively recent history.
Yeah, by Sigismund von Luxembourg, who's explicitly described as King of Hungary and a descendant of Lucian, Dragon King of Jerusalem. This brings the Dragon Court into a much more recent, historically verifiable period, connecting it to known historical figures.
What's particularly compelling about this specific claim is the assertion that while the Dragon Court might have become dormant in mainland Europe after the Merovingian fall, another key bloodline they explore, it nevertheless remained active in English kingship through significant historical figures like William the Conqueror and the Stuart monarchs.
So it never really went away.
That's the suggestion. An unbroken chain of influence, a continuous thread running through centuries of European power. And for its modern manifestation, the sources boldly claim that today, the Dragon Court operates through highly influential, often debated, secret societies such as Freemasonry, the Illuminati, and Rosicrucianism.
Okay, connecting it to the big ones.
Right. They link these groups, along with all its powerful corporate, political, and religious empires, sponsored by Rex Deus, suggesting a vast, interconnected network controlling global power structures. The sources also elaborate on an inner secret court of the Dragon Court known as the Sarkany Rend, or Snake Brotherhood.
Snake Brotherhood.
This inner circle, they claim, acts as a repository for ancient knowledge, reminiscent of the most clandestine inner courts found within Freemasonry, Gnosticism, and other esoteric traditions. This reinforces the idea of hidden, guarded knowledge preserved and passed down through generations.
And Dracula.
And then there's Vlad the Impaler, famously known as Dracula. He was, according to these sources, inexplicably inducted into the Sarkany Rend by King Sigmund, directly linking him to the powerful Order of the Dragon.
Vlad the Impaler was in this inner circle.
Allegedly. Vlad the Sequid is apparently known as Lord Draconis, and Vlad III inherited the chilling title Dracula, meaning son of a dragon. The sources even go so far as to claim Vlad was a night operative, consuming starfire, which is described as blood for enhanced mystical powers.
Consuming blood. Like the starfire thing we'll get to.
Exactly, directly connecting him to the alleged blood-drinking traditions of the Nephilim. The Dracula connection makes this almost too fantastical to believe, tying a figure of legend directly to this ancient order and alleged blood-drinking rituals. It almost sounds like a historical horror novel playing out in real time.
The Dracula connection definitely brings the fantastical to a very specific historical point, adding a chilling layer to these claims. And speaking of ancient symbols, the sources dedicate significant attention to the Ouroboros, that iconic image of a serpent clutching its tail.
The snake eating its tail.
Which they claim was the abiding symbol of the Ring Lords.
The Ouroboros within this framework is more than just a symbol of cyclical renewal. When depicted with a cross within the ring, it is explicitly said to represent the Holy Grail.
So the Ouroboros is the Grail symbol, in their view.
With the cross, yes. Furthermore, it's identified directly with Rosicruces, or Rosicrucianism, a prominent mystical and philosophical movement. This is a powerful visual argument from the sources, visually demonstrating that the ring and grail concepts are not just parallel but synonymous within this specific esoteric tradition.
Okay, ring and grail are the same.
When the dragon forms a circle around this Rosicrucis symbol, which they also link to the mark of Cain, it's tied to the menstruum of the red dragon and the philosopher's stone, terms rich in alchemical and profound mystical connotations, suggesting a quest for transformation and ultimate knowledge.
Marked of Cain again.
Yes. What's truly provocative here is the claim that Rosicrucians unaccountably reserve particular reverence to both Tubal-Cain and Cain with regard to primordial knowledge.
Reverence for Cain. That's unexpected.
Very. This is a direct, surprising link back to figures from the Book of Genesis, figures traditionally seen as villains or progenitors of evil, implying a hidden, revered lineage for these biblical villains within this esoteric tradition. The sources further assert that Rosicrucians were instrumental in spawning powerful philosophical and scientific movements like Theosophy and even the Royal Society.
The Royal Society, the scientific institution.
That's the claim, suggesting their influence extends far beyond mere mysticism and into modern intellectual and scientific institutions. It's a grand claim about the hidden roots of knowledge. #355read. The Serpent's Fall and Cosmic Chaos.
Let's shift our focus now to the serpent itself, a pivotal and deeply symbolic figure across countless cultures and especially central to these sources. The joint legacy of the serpent and the dragon, according to our sources, was not originally one of evil or treachery.
Oh, what was it then?
Instead, they contend it was that of the prehistoric crocodile, which was deemed most sacred of all creatures in antiquity. This immediately challenges conventional interpretations of the serpent.
A sacred crocodile. That's a fascinating reinterpretation of the serpent's role, taking us back to a primordial state. Our sources, citing ancient texts and figures like Ginsburg, claim the original serpent was far from the crawling, insidious creature we know today.
How so?
It was, they assert, king over all animals, stood upright like a man, was as tall as a camel, actually performed human work, and was described as the craftiest of all pre-Eden animals. This paints a picture of a highly intelligent, even noble and powerful being.
Wow. So upright, intelligent, almost human-like.
That's the picture painted. But after its alleged role in humanity's fall in Eden, a role that is also reinterpreted, it suffered a profound and horrifying degradation. It lost its limbs, its speech, its hands, feet, ears, wings, its formidable size, and even its mental advantages.
A complete downfall.
Yes, it gained poison, becoming the lowliest of animals. This severe punishment, the sources claim, only infuriated Satan and his seraphim allies even more, setting the stage for a cosmic, ongoing struggle.
Okay. And what about this dominant species theory?
Ah, yes. What's truly speculative yet compelling here is the dominant species theory. This theory posits that global serpent allegories aren't just myths, they're echoes, perhaps an ancestral memory, of a time when saurian or reptile-like beings were the dominant life forms on Earth, preceding humans.
Like dinosaurs, but intelligent.
Possibly, or something similar, almost as if they were the planet's first privileged inhabitants, or the Watcher's privileged life forms. There's even a curious reference mentioned in some commentary around these sources to Star Trek Voyager's account of an ancient, intelligent saurian race, suggesting that even modern science fiction might unwittingly tap into these deep, primordial memories. It's a truly mind-bending idea that redefines our place in deep history.
So we have this dramatic narrative of cosmic demotion, from a noble, intelligent, upright crocodile to the crawling snake. And this ties directly into the biblical figure of Leviathan, right? A creature shrouded in mystery and fear.
Exactly. Our sources explicitly identify Leviathan as an allegory for Satan, a dragon, a gliding serpent, the red dragon and serpent of Revelation, even potentially connecting it to the Mesopotamian Mushuso.
Okay.
What's truly compelling here is how these sources connect various cultural myths and biblical references to a singular foundational narrative of cosmic chaos. Leviathan, along with Loten, Tiamat, Yam, Rahab, Apsu, and Nahor, are all presented as one and the same monster at the time of creation, fundamentally representing the destructive waters of chaos.
The chaos monster.
Right. Creation myths across numerous seemingly disparate cultures, Canaanite, Babylonian, Norse, Egyptian, Mayan, and even the biblical Genesis account, consistently feature chaotic waters, which must be split so that life might begin on dry land.
The separation of waters.
In these foundational narratives, a divine being, often God, slew the monster of the sea or cut Rahab to pieces. The sources then hint at a deeper, unrecorded biblical story that they claim the traditional texts skirt around.
What do they claim happened?
They allege that Rahab, specifically identified as the angel of the sea, rebelled at the creation of the world, refusing God's command to separate the waters, which then led to its slaying and the subsequent creation of dry land. This defiance and destruction at creation is presented as a hidden, pivotal moment.
A rebellion at the moment of creation itself.
That's the idea. And as a final, intriguing connection, the sources bring in Nikola Tesla's identification of ether as a tenuous fluid filling all space, boldly presenting it as a scientific corroboration for Genesis's description of water above the expanse, implying a scientific backing for these ancient cosmic narratives of creation and chaos.
Tesla and Genesis, that's quite a leap.
It's definitely one of the more surprising connections made in the material.
Now we enter truly revisionist territory, where the sources undertake a wholesale reimagining of biblical genealogies. We begin with the Canaanite order of Melchizedek and the bull cult.
Okay, Melchizedek.
Our sources provocatively question why this biblical figure, traditionally seen as a holy patriarch and priest of God Most High, was drafted by spurious forces. They delve into the name Melchizedek itself, breaking it down as Melchi, meaning king, combined with Zadok, which they interpret as rebellious sun god.
Rebellious sun god, so they're twisting the name itself.
That's the claim. This, they claim, reveals a perverse origin for the biblical figure, suggesting a deliberate subversion.
What's fascinating here is the intricate attempt to link this revered figure to much more sinister origins, twisting traditional understanding. Molech, for instance, described as the son of Baal, and known variantly as Melech or Moloch, is presented as a Semitic deity who demanded the sacrifice of children.
Right, child sacrifice.
Bull, in turn, is characterized as a mating bull, symbolizing fertility, and identified as the son of El or Dagon. This bull cult is then surprisingly and controversially linked to Atlantis, the biblical tribe of Benjamin, and even the Essenes.
The Essenes again.
Yes, manifested in familiar biblical incidents like the golden calf idolatry and Jeroboam's idols. Early depictions of Molech as a man with a bull's head are highlighted as eerily resembling the Minotaur.
The Minotaur from Greek myth.
Exactly, which the sources emphasize came about through the bestial copulation of King Minos' wife, Pasiphae, with a Poseidon-sent white bull, leading directly to the practice of child sacrifices.
Okay, so it's linking pagan myths, biblical figures, and these dark practices.
Precisely. It creates a dark, interconnected history of sacrifice, monstrous lineage, and perverted worship stretching across ancient civilizations. The Egyptian bull cults of Apis and Osiris, with their subterranean labyrinth of Serapis, are seen as having similar esoteric dimensions to the Atlantean and Enochian sun cults, implying a shared, hidden lineage of belief systems.
And the Canaanites.
And the connection deepens with the audacious claim that Canaanites allegedly migrated from Crete, bringing this bull cult with them, linking it to the Philistine god Dagon, who is half man, half fish, and figures like Linus and Enoch, blurring the lines between human, divine, and monstrous. Wow.
Finally, the sources assert that the modern Masonic order of Melchizedek is a spurious order that, while claiming descent from legitimate biblical figures like Melchizedek, Abraham, David, Solomon, and Jesus, in reality follows the perverted Canaanite order and covertly worships the evil god El.
That's an incredibly strong accusation against a Masonic order.
It is very direct.
So Melchizedek, a revered biblical figure, is recast by these sources as a corrupted origin point. This leads us seamlessly to the Essenes, a prominent Jewish sect known for their asceticism and esoteric beliefs.
Right, the Dead Sea Scrolls group.
Our sources describe them not just as a sect, but as guardians of secret knowledge and even counter-conspirators. They provocatively note that the Essenes called themselves sons of Zadok, linking back to Melchizedek, and sons of light, terms they highlight as also being used by the mythical Tuatha De Danann, the Gnostics, and the Freemasons.
Suggesting a shared lineage again?
Exactly, a hidden shared lineage of secret societies. The sources delve deep into the Essenes' alleged practices and beliefs, presenting a very different picture from conventional scholarship. They claim the Essenes cherished Enoch and revered the serpent dragon as an ancient symbol of the Essene therapeutate heritage, directly linking them to the infamous White Snake Brotherhood of Egypt.
The White Snake Brotherhood.
Okay, their unique form of sun worship is highlighted. They prayed towards the sun at dawn, specifically worshipping Tammuz, which the sources frame as being in defiant contrast and opposition to other Israelite sects. This practice, they claim, outraged Ezekiel, as depicted in the Bible.
Right, Ezekiel mentions sun worship in the temple.
The Essenes, described as princes of Jerusalem, allegedly escaped to Europe after 70 CE, following the destruction of Jerusalem, and, crucially, formed leading European families and later founded the Knights Templar, a truly significant historical claim.
Essenes founded the Templars. That's a big one.
It is a very big claim. They are said to have inherited the 7 sacred sciences and received profound knowledge from Watchers, those fallen angels from Genesis 6, and explicitly adopted the name Watchers or Nazarenes for themselves.
They called themselves Watchers.
According to these texts. Furthermore, the Essenes are presented as followers of immortal Jesus, distinct from the divine Son of God, and as guardians of the Davidic messianic bloodline, which they preserved underground from Roman persecution, known as the Despacini.
The Despacini, Jesus' family line.
Exactly. Their beliefs are intricately tied to Kabbalism and pagan Egyptian mysticism, with the sources claiming that Moses and Hermes were both patriarchs of alchemy. Kabbalism itself, they contend, stemmed from knowledge received from a select company of angels, fallen, maliciously given to disobedient children of the earth, Cainites.
So Kabbalah comes from fallen angels.
That's the assertion here. A deliberate dissemination of forbidden knowledge. The sources then link the revived Essene order to the Red Cross order, decreed to wear the Red Cross and 16 mystical stars. with the rose and the lily as emblems, symbols that later became the fleur-de-lis for the Priory of Zion and the rose for the Grail.
All these symbols connecting.
It's a complex, multi-layered web of symbols, allegiances, and historical reinterpretation. Finally, a truly significant claim is made. Freemasonry and various mystical Muslim sects allegedly contend that the Old Testament itself was corrupted by later Israelite regimes to hide these true bloodlines and the esoteric knowledge.
Corrupted scripture.
Suggesting a deliberate alteration of scripture to conceal these revisionist genealogies from the public.
This alleged contamination of scripture is, in these sources, a core tenet of this revisionist history, suggesting that what we read is far from the whole truth. And nowhere is it more boldly asserted than in the mind-bending claims surrounding the biblical figures of Moses and Aaron.
Moses and Aaron. What do they say?
Theosophists, according to our sources, take an extraordinary step. They outrageously reposition Moses' pedigree from the priestly tribe of Levi in Israel to Egyptian royal bloodlines, going so far as to claim he was the son of a pharaoh.
Moses, son of Pharaoh. That completely changes the Exodus story.
Exactly. This is a truly radical departure from the traditional biblical narrative, a monumental identity theft, as the sources put it. This mind-boggling identity theft, they claim, asserts that the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten was actually Moses, and his co-regent Smekhar was Aaron. Akhenaten is Moses.
That's the claim. This directly links these biblical figures to the powerful Egyptian dragon court and the legendary Great White Brotherhood of Heliopolis, a significant occult group. This theory, however, relies on dating the Exodus to Akhenaten's reign, which was around 1350 BCE.
But isn't the traditional date much earlier?
Yes, despite traditional biblical chronology placing the Exodus much earlier, around 1446 BCE, the sources don't shy away from this discrepancy. They explicitly accuse biased secular humanists and theosophists of manipulating Egyptian chronology to fit this specific narrative, often referencing their Andalusis doctrine, which is a Masonic dating system.
Okay, so they acknowledge the dating issue but blame manipulation.
Right. Akhenaten himself is identified as the royal muse, or musis, meaning offspring, a term they connect to the Egyptian crocodile god Mesa and the Mesopotamian Musus, which are presented as originating, spurious sources for the messianic bloodline.
And Miriam, Moses' sister.
Her role is also heavily revised. Theosophists claim Miriam was Queen Kayak, or Mary Kiba, who was allegedly both the half-sister and wife to Akhenaten Moses, and even the mother to the famous Tutankhamun.
Miriam was Tutankhamun's mother.
That's the assertion in these specific texts. This convoluted and deeply controversial lineage then allegedly links the Davidic line directly to Egyptian and Mesopotamian dragon strains through her supposed daughter, Kiba Tashit. It's an intricate, highly controversial rewriting of established history and biblical figures, aiming to completely re-anchor their origins.
This rerouting of biblical figures continues, affecting even the patriarch Joseph and the Egyptian vizier Yuya.
Joseph in Egypt. What's the claim there?
Revisionist history, as presented in these sources, claims Yuya, who was a powerful vizier for several pharaohs, was actually the biblical Joseph, and his wife Tuya was none other than Asenath, Joseph's Egyptian wife. Names like Yusuf and Yosef are cited as linguistic variants, intended to support this audacious connection.
Yuya as Joseph.
Interesting. The sources, in attempting to solidify this connection, take a particularly provocative interpretation of Genesis 45:8, where Joseph tells his brothers, "He has made me father to Pharaoh."
Right, I remember that verse.
This verse is allegedly, and they argue misleadingly, quoted to raise Joseph to a pharaonic dynastic founder, implying he physically fathered Egyptian kings. The traditional biblical understanding, of course, is that Joseph was a powerful vizier and guardian to the pharaoh's children, not a biological parent to the royal line itself.
A very different interpretation of father to Pharaoh.
Completely. Tuya, or Asenath, is further linked to a priestess of the god Min, and is allegedly the granddaughter of Thutmose III, or Amenhotep III, who was then presented as the founder of the Great White Brotherhood of the Master Craftsmen, a powerful hidden brotherhood. So Joseph married into this secret brotherhood.
That's the implication, that his marriage brought him directly into a powerful hidden network of knowledge and power. And this is where the alleged Esau's dragon bloodline enters the picture, adding another layer of controversy.
Esau, how does he connect?
Tuya's lineage, they claim, connects to Igrath, who is identified as the daughter of Esau and Bashemath. This connection is then used to establish a parallel matriarchal dragon court in ancient Egypt, thereby bringing dragon blood directly into Joseph's descendants.
So Esau's line connects to Joseph's Egyptian family.
effectively contaminating, or depending on the perspective, enriching the traditional biblical lineage with this specific controversial bloodline. It's a very deliberate reseeding of the biblical family tree.
And the alleged contamination, or reseeding, continues, with Esau and Ishmael playing pivotal roles in what these sources term the Amalekite dragon alliance.
Esau and Ishmael, the other sons.
Right. Theosophist mythologies, in stark contrast to mainstream biblical accounts, discredit Esau's brother Jacob, and instead claim that Esau and Bashmath's descendants, the Edomites and Amalekites, were the true dragon court heirs.
Wow, flipping the birthright narrative completely.
Totally. This narrative creates a direct and fundamental challenge to the Abrahamic birthright narrative, shifting the perceived divine favor. Esau's marriage to Egyptian, Horite, and Hittite wives groups they link to Nephilim is said to have begun new Israelite and dragon dynasties. Amalek, Esau's grandson, allegedly inherited the unified dragon title, solidifying this controversial lineage.
Amalek, the enemy of Israel as the dragon heir.
Hagar, Abraham's Egyptian maidservant, is also given a royal lineage in these texts. She is claimed to be Pharaoh Senchertches's daughter, who they assert was a descendant of Nimrod. This, the sources contend, deliberately introduced dragon blood into Abraham's line through his son Ishmael.
Hagar as Egyptian royalty.
Ishmael's wife, Mahalath, identified as the daughter of Pharaoh Amenhotep II and Egrath, is said to have enhanced the purity of the dragon bloodline, linking directly to the powerful Aramonic kings.
Okay, so dragon blood coming in through both Esau and Ishmael's lines.
Exactly. And then, in a truly breathtaking and controversial claim that would rewrite the very foundations of Abrahamic faiths, Isaac himself is thought to be the son of Sarah and Pharaoh Senchertchesari.
Isaac wasn't Abraham's son.
According to this specific, highly controversial claim, yes. This completely severs his direct Noahic and Abrahamic link through Abraham, instead uniting dragon blood with the threefold blessings granted to Abraham, a shocking claim that essentially co-opts the biblical promises.
That's earth-shattering if true within their system.
It is. The uncommon hatred of Amalekites for Israelites, which is well documented biblically, is then explained by these sources as stemming from their parallel or antithesis messianic inheritance through Esau and Ishmael, which they believed they held.
So their hatred was because they thought they were the true heirs?
That's the rationale provided. Finally, the sources claim that the matriarchal dragon court was inserted into the messianic segment of Israelite royal succession through Tamar's Hamitic royal bloodline via Perez, her son with Judah.
Tamar and Judah, another complex story.
Indeed. Tamar herself is connected to the palm tree allegory, which is the great mother Seba for the matriarchal dragon court, with ties to antediluvian myths and the deluge cataclysm. It's an incredibly intricate and, again, profoundly controversial reweaving of biblical history, designed to showcase an alternative, hidden royal lineage. Now we go back to the very beginning, to Cain, who is arguably the most notorious and reviled figure in Genesis.
Right, the first murderer.
Theosophists, however, see him radically differently. They claim Cain and his descendants were not murderers or outcasts, but were instead maligned by vitriolic followers of Adonai, referring to the traditional God of the Bible.
Maligned how?
They assert Cain's name, Queen, actually meant smith or king, not murderer, and astonishingly, they elevate him to the status of a saintly patriarch.
Cain as a saintly patriarch.
That's the claim. This is truly where the revisionist history turns the biblical narrative on its head and flips our understanding of good and evil within these sources. The sources allege that Cain contained royal seed, Nephilim blood, while his brother Abel did not.
So Cain had Nephilim blood.
That's what they say. Abel's death, in this context, is reinterpreted as purely metaphorical. The ground figuratively swallowed up Abel's blood, for he was not of royal seed. This narrative, therefore, elevates Cain above Abel in terms of lineage and destiny.
A metaphorical death.
Okay. Cain is said to have acquired dominion over the earth and kingship, especially over a distinct group referred to as the people of day 6, a concept we touched on earlier, referring to a different earlier creation of humans, implying two distinct human lineages.
Dominion over the day 6 people.
His offering was rejected by God, not due to unrighteousness as traditionally understood, but because of his inherent kingly, godlike, or semi-divine status, which the traditional gods supposedly didn't recognize or approve of.
Rejected for being too kingly.
That's the argument. The sources even identify Cain as King Kish of Mazda in Sumerian lore, an ancestral forebearer of Zarathustra, and followers of Osiris and Horus, directly linking him to the Rosy Cross Masons of the East. Intriguingly, Mazda itself is said to mean one that prostrates himself as a serpent, reinforcing the serpentine connection that runs through all these claims.
Prostrates as a serpent.
And perhaps most shockingly, the infamous mark of Cain, traditionally seen as a curse or a sign of divine protection against murder, is reframed as a sevenfold blessing, described vividly as a serpent incurved into a circle with a red cross in the center.
The mark was a blessing, and it's that Rosicrucian symbol again.
Exactly. This symbol, they claim, specifically symbolized Cain's allegiance to Satan and the fallen seraphim angels, and served as the sign of kingship for the people of Day 6.
So allegiance to Satan was the blessing.
Within this framework, yes. What's truly astonishing, then, is the complete inversion of biblical narrative. Cain, the traditional villain, is presented not as a murderer, but as a saintly, divinely blessed patriarch of a royal bloodline, destined for dominion, a shocking redefinition that shifts the very foundation of good and evil within these theories. And what did these Cainite kings allegedly do to maintain their power and reinforce their royal seed or Nephilim lineage? Our sources claim they drank starfire.
Starfire. What on earth is that?
This starfire might sound like something from a fantasy novel, but these sources describe it in a very specific and quite graphic way. It's alleged to be a blood-based concoction, specifically menstrual blood.
Menstrual blood? Seriously?
That's the claim. Consumed not for ritualistic sacrifice in the traditional sense, but with the supposed aim of gaining almost superhuman advantages, heightened knowledge, increased stamina, potent immune boosts, and even, most remarkably, immortality.
Immortality from drinking blood. This practice, the sources claim, led to what's called the quickening, which increased the powers of awareness, perception, and general intuition.
The quickening, like from Highlander.
It's directly linked to fairy lore, where magical power could be transferred, and even, intriguingly, to modern Highlander fictions, which are seen as allegorizing this lightning or energy transfer of life force. This ritual is presented as a central Nephilim tradition, with Jewish legends cited stating that Nephilim began to drink blood, according to Jewish legend, in a vain attempt to regain their immortality when they turned against humanity.
So Nephilim drank blood to regain immortality.
That's the connection made. This tradition, chillingly, is said to have directly inspired the legends of Dracula, explicitly linking him back to the Dragon Order and the concept of blood-drinking vampires, or night-operating Upier, which they connect to figures like Oberon from folklore.
Dracula again. It all ties back.
The ancient city of Jericho, famously destroyed in the biblical narrative, is also brought into this, unaccountably remembered as the City of the Moon and the City of Thoth, Enoch the Evil.
Jericho, City of the Moon.
Yeah. The sources suggest it was possibly home to a menstrual blood-drinking cult of the Nephilim, implying this might be why Jericho was singled out for special destruction in the biblical account. This adds an incredibly dark and mystical layer to a familiar biblical story, suggesting a hidden, horrific practice at its core.
From this reimagined Cain, the sources trace another powerful and equally controversial bloodline through Lilith.
Lilith, right.
She's described not just as Eve's alternative first woman, but as the original goddess Ninkursagi Isis of the Cainites. And it's through her, they claim, that she produced the first race antediluvian giants. This positions Lilith as a foundational matriarch of this alternative powerful lineage.
Lilith is presented in these texts as the original dragon queen, and, quite shockingly, the mother of vampires.
Mother of vampires.
She is said to have held the matrilineal inheritance to the kingdom of Melkut, the sovereignty of the dragon court, known as the beautiful dragon queen of the Anunnaki, again, those fiery sons of heaven. The owl queens of the dragon court, her descendants, are likened to lilies and lotus flowers, symbols that spawned names like Lilith, Lily, Lulawa, and Lilith. This, they claim, even connects to the ladies of the lake, a reference often associated with Mary Magdalene in certain Gnostic traditions.
Lilies, ladies of the lake.
In Hebrew tradition, Lilith is labeled a Lamia, a blood-sucking demon, vampire of Greek mythology that flew at night like a screech owl, drawing a direct, chilling link to the screech owls of Anamisaw mentioned in Isaiah. This ties Lilith explicitly to the vampiric, blood-drinking traditions we just discussed regarding starfire.
Okay, so Lilith connects directly to the vampire mythos.
Yes. The sources then venture into the most provocative territory regarding Cain's paternity, asserting that Lilith, as first concubine of Adam and killer of infants, is tied to Satan's alleged violation of either Eve or Lilith, producing Cain.
So Cain's father was Satan. or Lilith was his mother via Satan.
It's presented somewhat ambiguously, either Eve or Lilith as the mother, but Satan, or Semialinki, as the father. Nama, often identified as a daughter of Lamech in traditional texts, is presented as Shubad or Ninpuabi, a matriarchal dynast descending from Lilith, which in this narrative confirms that daughters of Cain did in fact copulate with fallen angels.
Confirmation of angel-human offspring.
The sources conclude that Lilith's connection to Samael, who is identified as Enki and the chief of fallen angels, or venom of God, supports the claim that Cain was born of angelic blood through either Eve or Lilith, making him a radiant child and son of a snake. This asserts an unbroken line of demonic or angelic lineage from the very beginning of humanity, flowing through these matriarchal figures.
And these powerful bloodlines, this dragon kingship, didn't simply vanish with the Great Flood. They continued to reassert themselves in the post-Diluvian era.
After the flood,
Nimrod, a key figure after the flood, is claimed not to be a descendant of Noah in the traditional sense, but rather the son of Tubal-Cain, or even directly Cain himself. He allegedly sponsored the kingship in Egypt, and shockingly, reintroduced the abomination of drinking blood to the post-flood world.
Nimrod wasn't Noah's descendant, and he brought back blood drinking.
That's the claim. This is a direct and profound challenge to the biblical narrative of Nimrod's lineage and actions, casting him as a central figure in the perpetuation of this ancient hidden power. The forces assert that Nimrod and his descendants then fused Noah's descendants with the Nephilim scourge that also survived the flood.
Nephilim survived the flood.
Allegedly, yes. Creating what they term a revisionist historical mutant, a deliberate blending of the two lineages, ensuring the continuation of the dragon blood. Gnostics, they claim, further complicate Noah's lineage by asserting that Ham and Japheth, Noah's other sons, were either secretly introduced into the ark as a secret posterity of angels, or they sojourned to dwell among those people, Nephilim, thereby becoming reprobate descendants of Nephilim and giants.
So even Noah's other sons were compromised.
That's the suggestion. This further undermines their traditional biblical lineage, suggesting even Noah's own family was compromised or co-opted. Adam, meanwhile, is reconceptualized by theosophists not just as the first man, but as the first priest-king or fisher-king, presented as the model of earthly kingship and the original human to seed the Sangreal.
Adam as the first Sangreal source.
This positions him as a prototype for this unique royal bloodline. The Sumerian god Enki, who these sources directly identify as Satan or Samael, and his half-sister wife Ninkursag, referred to as the Serpent Lady or Lady of Life, are presented as the true genesis of the patriarchal and matriarchal Sangreal, and the origin of the pharaonic tradition of marrying half-sisters.
Enki and Ninkursag as the real originators.
This is a complete reframing of the divine and human origins of royalty, pushing it into a much darker serpentine realm. While Adam was a prototype for this kingship, the sources adamantly argue that Cain was the true and root progenitor of the kingly bloodline, through Eve and an outside force, namely Satan or Enki.
So Cain, not Adam, is the real root.
Yes. This positions Cain as the originating archetype for the giants and, provocatively, a bastard son of Eve, born of this alternative non-Adamic paternity.
Wow.
The grand implication of all this, drawing these threads to the present day, is that the dragon doctrine of subjugation continues today, where those without this specific dragon blood are considered inferior and subordinate beings. This, the sources ominously claim, foreshadows a coming world government that will be led by devout followers of Satan and descendants of fallen angels and Nephilim. #outro. We've truly journeyed through an intricate tapestry of ancient theories and revisionist histories, exploring claims about the very origins of power and lineage that are as mind-bending as they are audacious.
Absolutely mind-bending.
From the symbolic red dragon on the Welsh flag to the literal blood-drinking rituals allegedly performed by ancient kings and the complete reimagining of biblical figures like Cain, Moses, and Joseph, these sources offer a truly alternative perspective on how the world as we know it came to be and perhaps how it might evolve.
What's truly thought-provoking about this material is its intricate weaving of ancient myths, religious texts, and historical figures into a single, cohesive, albeit controversial narrative. It's a testament to the human desire to find hidden patterns and connections in the vast sea of information available to us, often creating new frameworks for understanding our past and future.
Yeah.
It certainly forces you to look at familiar stories through a very different lens, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And here's where it gets really interesting. If these sources are to be believed, The coming world government will be led by devout followers of Satan and descendants of fallen angels and Nephilim, who will, astonishingly, announce themselves to be descendants of Cain.
Descendants of Cain ruling the world.
What does this all mean for our understanding of history, for biblical prophecy, and for the hidden forces that may be at play in the world around us, if these deep, ancient conspiracies are indeed unfolding into our present?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
The sources themselves provocatively end by suggesting that while these claims seem convincing and internally consistent within their own framework, they are ultimately designed to deceive the elect.
So even the sources themselves suggest caution.
Exactly. This leaves us with a truly compelling thought to consider. In a world saturated with such deeply intertwined and competing narratives about our past and future, how do you discern truth from deception? How do you weigh evidence and perspective when faced with such foundational challenges to what you thought you knew?
A crucial question.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.